All right, let's jump into this deep dive. Looks like we're tackling some pretty big questions today. Truth, reality, even a bit of philosophy mixed in there. Got some excerpts from a Jordan Peterson lecture. Maps of Meaning, I think it was called. Definitely some mind-bending stuff.
You've got a good one there. Peterson, he always makes you think, doesn't he? The way he defines truth, well, it's not always what you expect. We're going to be looking at truth from all sorts of angles, starting with, a Darwinian perspective.
The Darwinian evolution. So how does that connect to, like, the idea of truth?
Well, you got to think of it this way. In a Darwinian sense, truth isn't about, these big philosophical statements or anything. It's more about what actually helps something survive. What lets an organism actually reproduce in its environment.
Like nature's running this huge experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And the only truth is what actually, makes it through, what survives the test.
Exactly. And just like, you can't always predict the stock market, right? Life, it throws stuff at you that you don't see coming. The organisms that thrive, they're the ones who can adapt, roll with the punches,
Yeah. It's kind of like how we deal with information overload these days. It's like the world's always changing. We're always having to learn, adapt, try to figure out what works to keep up.
It shows you the practical side of truth, right? What lets us actually function, achieve things in a world that's, well, pretty unpredictable sometimes. Then Peterson, he goes on to talk about a more traditional way of looking at reality, the what's it called, materialistic perspective.
Right. The idea that reality is basically just, physical things we can sense around us.
Yeah, that's been kind of a foundation for science, Observe, measure, experiment. That's how we learn about how things work.
But then Peterson, he brings in quantum mechanics. All that weird stuff happening with matter at the subatomic level. It's almost like the foundation of that material reality starts to get a little, fuzzy.
For sure. Quantum mechanics, it shows us things like wave-particle duality, where things can be like waves and particles at the same time. It really messes with that idea of solid matter that we think we understand.
So if we can't even pin down what the building blocks of reality actually are, where does that leave us when we're trying to figure out what's true?
Well, that's where pragmatism comes in, another way to look at it,
And this is where Peterson brings in William James, right? The idea that since we never have all the information, truth becomes more about what's true enough to, solve a problem, get us where we want to go.
He uses a great example with a can of Coke. You don't have to be a chemist to enjoy it. You pick it up, open it, drink. That interaction, it's pragmatically true for you, even if you don't know, every single thing about what's in it.
It's like focusing on what works practically rather than getting stuck trying to find some absolute, capital T truth.
Right. Think about all those times you got to make decisions. You never have all the info. You're always weighing what what you need to know, what's enough to move forward. That's pragmatism in action.
It makes you think maybe we're all kind of pragmatists, even if we don't realize it. But then Peterson, he goes in a different direction. Starts talking about the death of God.
Now, he's careful to say it's not like God actually dying. What he's talking about is traditional religion and how it's not, the source of values and morality anymore. Not for everyone, anyway.
Right, and here's where he points out this kind of conflict. Science, it's great at describing the material world, but it doesn't tell us what's good or bad, right or wrong.
Exactly. So the question becomes, if science doesn't give us those values, then where do they come from? What does that mean for a society that relies so much on science?
It makes you think about all the disagreements we're seeing.
Yeah.
About, what makes a good life? What's a fair society? It's like we don't have a shared way to decide what really matters anymore.
Peterson suggests that maybe, just maybe, evolution itself has something to do with shaping those values.
So he's saying that our actions, the things we value, they impact our survival.
Mm-hmm.
And that means natural selection could be acting on our values too.
Right. It's it's a controversial idea. But he argues those values, they might be true in a sense because they've been shaped by the same forces that shaped, our physical bodies.
So our values could be as much a product of evolution as our bone structure is. That's wild.
He uses the example of how females choose their mates. Over time, women have picked certain traits in men. So their preferences have been a huge part of shaping who we are as a species. It's like in evolution, true thing about the choices we make too. Choices that can affect generations to come.
Wow, it's amazing to think those choices, those preferences could be so connected to our biology and evolution. But how do we measure how stable those values are? Isn't change kind of built into both evolution and culture?
That's a great point. And that brings us to Peterson's exploration of dominance hierarchies. Might seem like a strange topic, but stick with me here.
Okay, dominance hierarchies. I'm curious, how does that relate to truth and values?
Think about it. Hierarchies, they're everywhere in nature, not just in humans. Peterson talks about lobsters, believe it or not. They use serotonin, like we do, to track their status in their social hierarchies.
Lobsters have serotonin. I'm never looking at a lobster roll the same way again.
It really shows you how deep this whole drive for status, the social order thing goes. It's not just us. It's in creatures that are, well, pretty different from humans. And here's where Peterson's argument gets even more interesting.
Okay, lay it on me. What's the next mind-blowing idea?
He says the qualities that help individuals succeed in these hierarchies, things like strength, intelligence, charisma, they start to get represented as this messianic figure in a more abstract way.
So the qualities that always seem to, help people rise to the top throughout history and across different systems, they become like this almost mythical ideal leader.
Right. And remember that study he mentions about female mate selection? The thing that mattered most to the women wasn't wealth. It was the capacity for success. They were attracted to men who had the potential to rise up, to be useful, regardless of where they were at the moment.
It kind of goes back to that idea that we're wired to look for partners who embody those traits that have been successful throughout our evolutionary history.
Yeah.
Traits that help with survival, both for individuals and for the group. It's like we're drawn to those who embody those values without even realizing it.
Exactly. And all of this leads Peterson to a pretty provocative conclusion about religion, but I think we should save that for part 2 of your deep dive.
Okay, you've got me hooked. What's this provocative conclusion about religion?
Well, Peterson, he says religion, at its core, it's a tool. Like science is a tool for understanding the physical world, right? Religion's a tool for, navigating life's complexities, making decisions, figuring out meaning, all that.
Interesting. So it's not just about blind faith or dogma. It's more like a framework, something that helps us deal with those big questions that we all have.
Exactly. And he points out, religion in one form or another, it's like a human universal, just like we see decoration in every culture. Or, marriage rituals. Language, obviously. Well, there's always some expression of the sacred, something beyond just the purely material.
But what about people who say they're not religious?
That's where Peterson gets really interesting. He says even people who, call themselves atheists or secular humanists, whatever, they're often working within frameworks of meaning and value that are, they're kind of like religious belief systems,
Right.
Functionally anyway.
So even if we reject traditional religion, the institutions, the doctrines, all that, we might still be holding on to certain values, certain narratives that shape how we see things. It's like those values are operating under the surface, influencing us even when we don't realize it.
It's like we're all living out these implicit narratives, stories that give our lives meaning, purpose, And those stories, whether we're aware of them or not, they often tap into these deep, ancient patterns of belief, the kind of stuff Peterson's talking about.
Makes you wonder if the whole religious versus non-religious thing is, maybe it's not as clear-cut as we think. Maybe it's less about categories and more about recognizing those underlying frameworks that we're all using to, make sense of the world.
It's a challenge, right, to look beyond the labels, to get at those deeper motivations that drive us, what we believe, how we act. It's about seeing how those values, those narratives, they connect us to something bigger, whether we call it religion or something else.
So how does this all tie back to that death of God idea, the one we were talking about before?
Peterson, he says Nietzsche wasn't just, complaining about churches closing or whatever. He was pointing to something much bigger, a shift in how we understand truth, value, meaning. If those old frameworks are crumbling, what do we replace them with? Where do we find something solid to base our beliefs on?
It feels like we're left with a lot of questions, doesn't it? If science doesn't give us values and traditional religion is, kind of fading away for a lot of people, how do we navigate all this? How do we make sense of all these different ways of understanding truth? The scientific way, the pragmatic way, evolution, religion.
That is the challenge, isn't it? And Peterson, he doesn't pretend to have all the answers. He's more about, making us think deeply, honestly, about these fundamental questions. He wants us to push past those simple either ideas to embrace the fact that being human is, it's complicated.
So in a way, he's saying, become your own philosopher. Engage with these questions. Look for what rings true to you.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And be okay with not knowing everything, Uncertainty is just part of being human. Maybe it's even a necessary part of finding meaning.
like that Darwinian idea we were talking about before. We're always adapting, evolving,
Yeah.
trying to find our place in a world that's, well, always changing. And that applies to how we understand truth, too. What seems true enough today might not be enough tomorrow.
It's humbling, for sure, to realize our knowledge is always going to be limited. Our perspective, it's just one view, and how we understand truth, it's always evolving. But you know what? There's also something kind of freeing about that, I think.
Freeing? How so?
It lets us off the hook, you know? We don't have to be right all the time. We don't have to cling to these rigid ideologies, fixed beliefs. We can be curious, you know?
Yeah.
Humble, open-minded, learn from our mistakes, be willing to change our minds when we get new information, embrace the mystery of it all.
So, if we're always evolving, if our understanding of truth is always changing, how do we make decisions? How do we even start to figure out what to believe?
That's where Peterson's emphasis on values comes in. He says we need to, anchor our beliefs, our actions in something solid. Values that aren't just, random preferences, things we just kind of made up.
He seems to be saying that these values, they might actually be true in a deeper sense because they've been shaped by, this incredibly long, complex interplay of evolution and culture.
Right. He sees them as a form of, collective wisdom, principles that have survived, that have worked because they've helped us thrive, survive as a species, create meaningful lives, all that.
And these values, they're not always spelled out in a science book or a religious text, but they're there, woven into who we are, the stories we tell, the choices we make, how we interact with the world.
Right. Yeah, he thinks they're operating on a deeper level. Often below our awareness, they guide our actions, shape how we see reality. It's like we're carrying this ancient wisdom inside us, this knowledge that's been passed down through generations, helping our ancestors survive, helping them face whatever challenges they had.
So it's about tapping into that wisdom, making it conscious, using it to find our way in the world today.
Exactly. It's recognizing that we're not just these isolated individuals making random decisions. We're part of something much bigger, a grand story. A story that connects us to the past and guides us into the future.
And even though that story is always being rewritten, there are these enduring themes, core values that seem to transcend time and culture.
Right.
Yeah.
And those are the values that Peterson's encouraging us to find, to explore, to make our own.
It's a lifelong journey, isn't it? Figuring out what those values are, how they fit with our own experiences, how to live them out in a world that often feels chaotic, unpredictable.
It is a journey, and it takes honesty, courage, a willingness to ask those tough questions, even when the answers aren't clear.
And maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the journey is more important than reaching some, final destination, getting that one perfect answer.
Maybe the real value is in the exploring, in the wrestling with those big questions, in the constant effort to understand ourselves and the world around us.
So it sounds like Peterson's saying, we shouldn't just accept whatever answers are handed to us. We got to actively shape our own understanding of truth and meaning.
He's big on personal responsibility, making conscious choices, even when it's tough.
Yeah, definitely.
And to do that, really do it, we got to know what our values are, right? Those guiding principles, the things that shape how we see the world, how we act.
He's saying those values, they're not just, random things we like. They're rooted in something deeper, something shaped by, thousands of years of human experience.
We've each got this internal compass, a set of directions passed down through generations. But sometimes, I don't know, it feels like we lose touch with it. Or maybe there's just so much noise around us, it's hard to hear,
And that's where looking at truth from all these angles, like Peterson does, it can really help. It's like he's giving us these different lenses to examine our own beliefs, our values, see how they line up with those deeper currents of human experience. So we can use those lenses, the Darwinian one, the materialistic, the pragmatic, even the religious, to see what forces have shaped our values.
Absolutely.
Dr. Peterson's generation grew up under that shadow, and they were caught between these two dominant ideologies, the capitalist West and the communist Soviet Union.
Right.
And each side was totally committed to its own belief system.
Oh, yeah.
To the point where they were willing to risk everything to defend it.
It's mind-boggling to think about.
It really is.
But then, Dr. Peterson takes this historical context.
Yeah.
And he connects it to something that feels surprisingly relevant even today.
Yeah.
And that's the Pareto distribution.
Okay.
Now, I have to admit, when I first heard about this Pareto distribution thing, my eyes kind of glazed over. But the way he explains it is actually fascinating.
It is. It's a really interesting concept. So the Pareto distribution basically reveals this pattern of inequality
Right.
that seems to just pop up everywhere,
Yeah.
regardless of like political systems or social structures.
Okay.
We see it in wealth distribution, of
Yes.
course. Think about how a small percentage of the population holds like a disproportionate amount of the wealth.
Yeah.
But it's not just money.
Right.
The Pareto distribution also applies to things like book sales.
Oh, right.
You have those runaway bestsellers that everyone's talking about.
Yeah.
And then tons of other books just barely sell any copies.
Yeah, it's true.
It's really interesting.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and think about hockey.
Oh, okay.
Another one of Dr. Peterson's examples.
Yeah.
A handful of players score like the majority of the goals,
Right.
while most players score far fewer.
It's true.
It's this strange pattern where a small percentage accounts for like the majority of the results.
Right.
Yeah. And to illustrate this whole concept,
Okay.
Dr. Peterson uses the analogy of a Monopoly game.
Okay.
Have you ever played Monopoly?
Oh, yeah, of course.
So as that game progresses,
Yeah.
it almost inevitably ends up with like one player holding all the property
Right.
and everyone else is bankrupt.
Yeah. That's a great analogy.
It is a good one.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about the Pareto distribution showing up in
Right.
book sales, hockey goals.
Right.
But then Dr. Peterson brings up his research on drug gangs.
Yeah.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, so what did he find out about drug gangs?
What he found
Yeah.
was that even within criminal organizations,
Okay.
the Pareto distribution held true.
Wow.
You'd think in like these illegal enterprises, things would be a little more egalitarian.
Yeah,
maybe.
you would think.
But no, even there, a small percentage of gang members controlled like most of the wealth and the power.
So if this inequality is so ingrained
Right.
in human systems, does that mean that attempts to level the playing field are just doomed to fail?
Well, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
And it's a question that a lot of people have asked over the years.
Yeah.
What about ideologies like Marxism
Right?
that aim for, equal distribution of wealth?
Right.
Well, this is where Dr. Peterson's analysis gets really thought-provoking.
Okay.
He points to the historical failures of Marxist regimes
Okay.
to achieve true equality,
Right.
despite their efforts to redistribute wealth and to eliminate those class distinctions.
Yeah.
The Pareto distribution seems to just reassert itself over and over again.
So it's like this force of nature almost.
It really is kind of remarkable.
Yeah.
Like this pattern that just keeps popping up,
Right.
no matter how hard we try to create a more equitable society.
It makes you wonder,
Yeah.
if inequality is so persistent, like why do people cling so fiercely to certain beliefs,
Yeah.
even risking their lives to defend them?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to the heart of Dr. Peterson's argument about the power of belief systems.
Okay.
He suggests that we need to look beyond just individual thoughts
Okay.
and consider the role of these shared narratives.
Yeah. Okay.
These narratives act as a kind of lens through which we interpret the world.
This reminds me of that experiment
Yeah.
with the invisible gorilla. Where people are so focused on counting basketball passes that they completely miss a gorilla walking through the scene.
Yeah.
It's a great illustration of how our beliefs really shape our perception.
Exactly. What we
Yeah.
believe to be important guides our attention.
Right.
And it often blinds us to things that just fall outside our existing framework of understanding.
So in a way, our beliefs create this filter
Right.
that shapes not only what we see,
Yeah.
but also how we act in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah, this makes me think about a story that Dr. Peterson shares
Yeah.
about one of his clients who was struggling to hold down even a simple volunteer job
Right.
despite having a lot of training.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking to hear how this person's repeated failures just eroded their sense of self-worth.
It's a really powerful story.
Yeah.
And it highlights the human need to feel competent
Right.
and valuable,
Yeah.
to contribute something meaningful,
Right.
even in seemingly small ways.
Which brings us to this idea of meaning making, right?
Exactly.
This search for purpose and significance in our lives,
Yeah.
it makes me wonder, if we're all influenced by these shared narratives, these belief systems, how do we even begin to unravel our own personal stories?
Yeah.
How do we figure out what truly matters to us?
That's a great question. And that's something we'll explore further as we go deeper into Dr. Peterson's analysis.
Okay.
He suggests that stories from ancient myths to classic literature
Yeah.
can offer us some valuable insights into the human condition.
Okay.
They provide us with a kind of roadmap
Right.
for navigating the complexities of life.
So it's like these stories hold a hidden code,
Yeah, in a way.
a key to unlocking a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Exactly.
I'm definitely intrigued to see where this deep dive takes us next.
Well, stay tuned because in part 2, we're going to unpack the fascinating world of mythology
Okay.
and its connection to human psychology.
Right.
You might be surprised by the wisdom that's hidden within these ancient narratives.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
All right, well, we'll pick this up next time on the deep dive.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we've established that these big overarching narratives, they can have a huge impact on how we see the world.
Right.
But how do we make sense of the more personal stories,
Yeah.
the ones that we tell ourselves?
Well, Dr. Peterson argues that we're constantly creating narratives,
Okay.
both consciously and unconsciously.
Right.
It's how we make sense of our experiences
Yeah.
and find meaning in our lives.
Okay.
But sometimes those narratives can become limiting.
Right.
They can trap us in these patterns of thought and behavior
Yeah.
that don't really serve us well.
So we're basically the authors of our own lives. But we're not always great storytellers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We might get stuck in a loop,
Okay.
replaying those same old stories of, victimhood or self-doubt,
Right.
which prevents us from growing and evolving.
So Dr. Peterson is saying that we need to become more aware of these internal narratives.
Yes.
And question their validity.
Exactly. He encourages us to ask ourselves,
Okay.
is this story serving me?
Right.
Is it helping me to become the best version of myself?
That's a powerful idea.
It is.
To step back and actually question those stories that we've been telling ourselves for years,
Yeah,
maybe even decades.
absolutely.
But it also seems like a really daunting task.
It can be.
Where do we even begin?
Well, Dr. Peterson suggests that we start by examining the stories we tell ourselves
Okay.
about our strengths and our weaknesses.
Okay.
For example,
Yeah.
we might have a story that we're not good at math,
Right.
which then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Or we might believe that we're not worthy of love,
Okay.
which can sabotage our relationships.
So it's about identifying those limiting beliefs
Yes.
and challenging them.
Exactly.
But then how do we go about rewriting those stories? It's not like we can just snap our fingers
Yeah.
and change our deeply ingrained patterns of thought.
Well, it takes conscious effort
Okay.
and a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones.
Right.
Dr. Peterson encourages us to adopt a more heroic stance,
Okay.
to see ourselves as the protagonist in our own lives,
Yeah.
capable of growth and transformation.
So he's talking about those classic underdog stories
Exactly.
where the hero faces these seemingly insurmountable odds,
Right.
but emerges triumphant in the end.
Yeah, they're so inspiring
Yeah.
because they speak to our desire to overcome challenges
Right.
and to find meaning in the face of adversity.
But in real life, it's not always so clear how to become the hero of our own story.
Right.
I mean, not all of us are going to slay dragons
Yeah.
or rescue princesses.
That's true.
Yeah.
But Dr. Peterson isn't talking about literal heroism.
Oh, okay.
He's referring to that internal journey
Okay.
of confronting our fears,
Right.
overcoming obstacles, and striving to live a life of purpose and meaning.
Okay.
And he suggests that this journey often involves a confrontation with what he calls chaos.
Chaos.
Yes, those unpredictable forces
Okay.
that disrupt our carefully constructed world.
Okay, so we've talked about the Pareto distribution and these societal structures, but how does chaos fit into all of this?
Well, think about it this way. Chaos represents the unknown,
Okay.
the unexplored territory that lies beyond our familiar routines and beliefs.
Okay.
It's in those moments of unexpected loss,
Yeah.
of profound disruption,
Okay.
that we're forced to confront the fragility of our constructed world.
So it's like when those carefully crafted narratives we've been telling ourselves, they just fall apart.
Right.
We're left grappling with the raw reality
Yeah.
of pain and suffering.
Exactly. And Dr. Peterson argues
Yeah.
that it's precisely in those encounters with chaos
Okay.
that we have the potential for growth and transformation.
Interesting.
He uses this metaphor of the hero's journey.
Okay.
This cyclical movement between order and chaos.
Right.
The hero ventures into the unknown,
Yeah.
confronts those forces that threaten their stability
Right.
and returns, hopefully,
Yeah.
with greater wisdom and resilience.
So it's not about avoiding chaos altogether,
No.
but rather learning how to navigate it,
Exactly.
how to integrate those experiences into our own personal narrative.
Precisely. And that brings us back to Dr. Peterson's fascination with mythology
Okay.
and its connection to human psychology.
Yeah, okay.
He believes that these ancient stories,
Yeah.
passed down through generations,
Right.
offer profound insights into the human condition.
Okay. But those myths can be pretty confusing.
They can be.
They're full of symbolism and metaphor,
Yeah.
gods and monsters,
Right.
and characters who just blur the lines between human and divine.
It's true.
How do we even begin to make sense of it all?
Uh-huh.
I mean, I remember reading The Odyssey in college,
Yeah.
and I was completely lost.
That's understandable. These stories weren't meant to be taken literally. They're a way of encoding deep truths about human experience,
Okay.
about the nature of good and evil,
Right.
about the struggles we all face in life.
Okay.
Dr. Peterson suggests that we need to approach these stories with a sense of curiosity
Yeah.
and openness,
Okay.
allowing them to speak to us on a symbolic level.
So instead of getting bogged down in the details,
Right.
we should try to understand the underlying message,
Yes,
the archetypal patterns that these stories are trying to convey.
exactly. For example, the hero's journey,
Okay.
this idea of venturing into the unknown and confronting challenges.
Yeah.
It's a universal theme that resonates across cultures and throughout history.
I guess we see that in stories like Star Wars, Harry
Sure.
Potter,
Absolutely.
even superhero comics.
Yeah.
The hero always faces trials and tribulations,
Right.
but they emerge stronger and wiser in the end.
Exactly. And Dr. Peterson argues
Yeah.
that these stories aren't just entertaining. They're actually providing us with a kind of blueprint
Okay.
for navigating the complexities of life.
Right.
They're showing us that it's okay to be afraid.
Yeah.
It's okay to make mistakes.
Right.
That it's through our struggles that we discover our true strength and resilience.
This all sounds very Jungian.
It is.
The idea of archetypes, a
Yes.
collective unconscious,
Right.
these universal patterns of meaning that are hardwired into the human psyche.
Exactly.
I remember reading about Carl Jung in college,
Yeah.
but I have to admit, I didn't really understand it at the time.
Well, you're right. Dr. Peterson draws heavily from Jungian psychology,
Okay.
particularly Jung's exploration of mythology
Right.
and its connection to the human psyche.
Okay.
Jung believed that these archetypes,
Yeah.
these recurring symbols and motifs and myths and stories,
Right.
represent fundamental aspects of the human experience.
So it's like these myths are offering us a glimpse
Yeah.
into our own unconscious minds,
Exactly.
helping us to understand those deeper motivations and desires
Yes,
that shape our behavior.
precisely. And this brings us to a really fascinating question.
Okay, what's that?
If these myths are so powerful,
Yeah.
if they offer us such profound insights,
Right.
why have they been so marginalized in modern society?
That's a great question.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, we live in a world that's dominated by science and technology,
Right.
where we're constantly bombarded with information and data.
Yeah.
It's easy to dismiss these ancient stories as mere superstition or,
Right.
or primitive storytelling.
And yet,
Yeah.
as Dr. Peterson points out,
Yeah.
we haven't outgrown our need for myth.
That's true.
We're still drawn to stories,
Yeah.
whether it's in books or movies or video games.
Right.
We're still fascinated by heroes and villains,
Yeah.
by quests and journeys,
Yeah.
by the struggle between good and evil.
It's like there's this part of us that longs for something more,
Yeah.
something that transcends the mundane routines of daily life. We want to feel like our lives have meaning,
Right.
that we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Precisely. And Dr. Peterson argues that myth can provide us with that sense of meaning and connection.
Okay.
It can help us to understand our place in the cosmos,
Right.
to grapple with those big questions of life and death,
Yeah.
and to find purpose in a world that often feels chaotic and meaningless.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the value of these myths.
Good.
But I'm still struggling with how to apply them to my own life.
Okay.
I mean, it's one thing to analyze them intellectually, to
Right.
dissect their symbolism and trace their historical origins, but how do we actually embody their wisdom?
Right.
How do we allow them to speak to us in a way that's meaningful and transformative?
That's where Dr. Peterson's work becomes particularly interesting.
Okay.
He doesn't just leave us with abstract theories and esoteric interpretations.
Right.
He offers practical strategies for integrating these methodological insights into our daily lives.
So it's not just about understanding the stories, it's about embodying their wisdom.
Exactly.
How do we do that?
Well, that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look at some of the practical implications of Dr. Peterson's approach
Right.
and how we can use these ancient narratives to cultivate a more meaningful and fulfilling life in the modern world.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it. All right, so we've explored these big overarching narratives, and we've delved into those personal stories we tell ourselves.
Right.
Now for the grand finale, how do we actually bring these insights into our daily lives and make them work for us?
That's the real challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one thing to kind of intellectually grasp these concepts.
Right.
But it's quite another to actually embody them in our actions and choices.
For sure, for sure.
Dr. Peterson offers some practical strategies for bridging that gap.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of strategies are we talking about?
Well, one of the key ideas he emphasizes is the importance of taking responsibility.
Okay.
Remember, he links meaning in life to responsibility.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we have agency,
Okay.
that we're not just passive victims of circumstance.
But responsibility can feel really overwhelming, can't it?
It can.
Like we're supposed to single-handedly solve all the world's problems.
Right. And Dr. Peterson acknowledges that
Okay.
he's not suggesting we take on the weight of the world all at once.
Okay.
Instead, he encourages us to focus on those areas where we can make a difference,
Right.
starting with our own lives.
So it's about those small, concrete actions we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
Like setting goals,
Yeah.
honoring commitments,
Right.
showing up for the people in our lives.
Absolutely. It's about taking ownership of our choices,
Okay.
even the seemingly insignificant ones.
Okay.
Dr. Peterson even uses this phrase, stand up straight with your shoulders back.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a metaphor for taking on the burden of being,
Right.
for embracing the responsibilities that come with living a meaningful life.
I like that imagery, standing tall, shoulders back.
Yeah,
It's a reminder to face the world with confidence and purpose.
exactly.
But what about those times when chaos throws us off balance?
Right.
Those unexpected events that shake our foundations
Yeah.
and make us question everything.
Well, those are the moments that truly test our resilience.
Yeah.
Dr. Peterson argues that instead of trying to avoid chaos,
Okay.
we need to learn how to navigate it.
Okay.
He uses the hero's journey as a metaphor for this process.
Yeah.
The hero ventures out into the unknown,
Yeah.
faces challenges,
Right.
and returns transformed by the experience.
So it's about embracing the ups and downs, the inevitable challenges that life throws our way.
Right.
And using those experiences to grow and learn.
Precisely. And this ties back to the importance of the stories we tell ourselves.
Okay.
We can choose to view those challenges as insurmountable obstacles.
Right.
Or as opportunities for growth and transformation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's about shifting our perspective,
Okay.
reframing those negative narratives,
Right.
and finding the strength to keep moving forward.
That reminds me of something that Dr. Peterson said
Okay.
about doing things properly.
Oh, yeah.
He seems to suggest that there's this sense of meaning and purpose to be found in striving for excellence,
Right.
even in the most mundane tasks.
Absolutely. It's about bringing our full attention and effort to whatever we're doing,
Okay.
whether it's writing a report,
Yeah.
cooking dinner, or
Uh-huh.
simply listening to a friend.
Yeah.
It's about taking pride in our work
Okay.
and striving to do it to the best of our ability.
It's almost like a form of mindfulness, isn't it?
It is, in a way.
Bringing that sense of presence and intention of every moment.
Exactly.
But in our fast-paced world,
Yeah.
it's easy to get caught up in the rush,
Right.
to lose sight of that deeper sense of purpose.
That's why it's so important to cultivate those practices that help us to stay grounded, to connect with our values,
Yeah.
and to remember what truly matters.
Yeah. What kinds of things are you thinking about?
Well, whether it's spending time in nature,
Okay.
engaging in creative pursuits,
Right?
or simply taking a few moments each day for quiet reflection.
So in a way, it's about finding that balance between order and chaos,
Yeah,
between engaging with the world
right.
and taking time for inner reflection.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from Dr. Peterson's work.
Okay.
It's not about finding easy answers or quick fixes.
Right.
It's about embracing the complexities of life,
Yeah,
the ongoing journey of self-discovery,
for sure.
and the continual striving for growth and meaning.
As we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I'm struck by the sheer breadth of Dr. Peterson's insights.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we've covered everything from the Cold War to Pinocchio,
Oh, right.
from the Pareto distribution to the hero's journey.
It's a lot to take in.
What stands out to you as the most impactful takeaway?
For me, it's the reminder that we all have the power to shape our own narratives,
Okay.
to choose the stories we tell ourselves,
Right.
and to find meaning and purpose even in the face of adversity.
Yeah, that's beautifully put.
Yeah.
And as we conclude, I want to encourage our listeners to continue exploring these ideas,
Yes.
to question their own beliefs,
Absolutely.
and to embrace the journey of self-discovery.
It's a journey worth taking.
It really is. You might be surprised by the wisdom you uncover along the way.